It's time! I've been wanting to make a top 10 favorite books of all time video since 2024 started. It's December. I'm over the anxiety. I've been able to pick my 10 favorite works of fiction out of the hundreds of books I've read over the last couple of years, and here's my top 10 list. I had to take nonfiction completely out of the equation. I used to primarily read nonfiction, so some of those books would have been on this list, but that's going to be an entirely separate video. I'm glad I'm making this list now because 3 of the books on this list were added in the last 7 months or so. I read them in 2024, and I imagine around the same time next year, my top 10 favorite books of all time will be different. Only the top 3 of this list are set in stone. The other 7 can switch places depending on my mood, depending on how I'm feeling, depending on how I'm viewing the reads at that specific moment in time. So let's just get right into it. Number 10, the worst of the best books I've read. The Six Deaths of the Saints by Alex E. Harrow. This is only 30 pages. It is a short story. But across those 30 pages, you go through the entire spectrum of emotions, from the gutter to godhood and back. This is an epic journey. Every page is years. The book takes place across several lifetimes, 6 lifetimes to be exact. We follow a young woman who is saved from squalor, saved from poverty and death, from a prince who gives her meaning, gives her purpose, and she lives her life as his champion. She helps him conquer the world. She helps him become an emperor, and she gives up several lifetimes to do it. The plot twist at the center of this story was amazing, and the way it ended blitzed chills down my spine. Such a beautiful story, bittersweet, moving, inspiring, beautifully written, and completely so concise. I've not read any other works from Alex E. Harrow. This is one of the first books I've read off of Book Talk. A Book Talker recommended it to me, and it completely changed my opinion of Book Talk as a whole because this book was on the money. 5 out of 5 stars. The best of the worst books I've ever read, and you could read it in less than 30 pages, and it's on Kindle Unlimited. So give this one a try. Numero 9. The Drawing of the Three by Stephen King, the second installment in his Dark Tower series. I have yet to complete my journey to the tower. I've read the first 3. I'm currently on a reread. I'm rereading the series with a friend. I read Gunslinger and the Drawing of Three. I'm reading The Wasteland next month. This is such an epic installment in this grand journey. This is the gathering of the Fellowship, the quartet that follow the Gunslinger on his journey to the Dark Tower. This book has everything. It has drugs. It has great action scenes. There's a naked gunfight. I never knew I wanted a naked gunfight in my fiction, but after reading it, I'm so upset that not more books have naked gunfights. Stephen King writes characters like no other. His characterization is second to none. That is why he is my favorite author. But surprisingly, this is the only Stephen King book on my top 10 list. It's hard to talk about The Dark Tower without getting into spoilers. But look it up. It's a strange, epic fantasy slash sci-fi slash western series. I understand why so many Stephen King fans love this series. I can't wait to finish my journey to the Dark Tower in 2025. Imagine that the series gets better and better. I'm pretty sure this book won't be on the list next year, and that'll be a sad, or maybe even a happy day. Reading a good book is always happy. But The Drawing of Three by Stephen King, that's my number 9. At the number 8 spot is a book that is near and dear to my heart. One of the first works of adult fantasy I ever read. I read it in 2019, and I realized that I love dragons, I love monsters, I love magic. And I'm talking about A Crown for Cold Silver by Alex Marshall. I watched the Game of Thrones TV show, and I was looking up other grimdark series similar to Game of Thrones that were complete. And I looked up A Crown for Cold Silver that was on this top 100 list, and I read it. And it was hilarious. It was engaging. The characterization was phenomenal. And it's a dark, gritty story. The first in a trilogy. I've yet to finish it. I'm actually on a reread of this trilogy. I'll be finishing this early in 2025. It is grimdark. It is psychedelic. It's like Game of Thrones on drugs. That's the best I could describe it. The writing isn't the best. This is objectively probably the worst book on this list, but subjectively, I love it so much. It'll be a very sad day indeed when this book is no longer on my top 10. That'll really be a passing of the torch moment for me as a reader because this is one of the books that got me into reading and no one talks about it. I hope it finally gets some popularity here on BookTube because I'm sick of being the only person that's read this flawed masterpiece. Book number 7, The Giver. Whenever I talk to people about this book, it sends shivers down my spine. This book was so emotionally compelling to me. This book changed me. It affected the way I viewed things. It made me really help put into words a lot of the things that I've always felt at the core of my person. How a life without conflict, a life without diversity, a life without struggle, a life without color is no life at all. A sanitized life is not life. It is just existence. It is just surviving. The Giver takes place in the future, dystopian or utopian society, depending on your viewpoint, in a civilization where there's no color, there's no danger, there's no struggle. A very sanitized existence. Our protagonist, Jonas, he gets called to be the next giver for this society. He starts to realize that this civilization, this community that he's a part of is kind of a lie, and he revolts. The ending of this book was perfect. I'm actually very annoyed that the author went out of her way to turn this perfect novel into a 4-part series, a quartet where every subsequent installment is worse and worse, because The Giver is a perfect story. I understand why this book is often required reading in American school districts, and I think this should be required reading forever. I think this story is truly timeless. It is my second favorite classic book of all time, and this is really something special. If you're one of those few people that has never heard of this book or has never read it, definitely read it. You could read it in less than 7 hours, and I think it could change your life. Now on to the number 6 spot. Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. This book wrecked me. I had such a visceral, emotional reaction to this story, and upon completion, I was just like a dead battery. No energy. It had so many emotions throughout. It was really a story that I related to so strongly because of my upbringing, because of my life. I've encountered so many individuals like Eleanor Oliphant, our protagonist and main character. Eleanor has lived a middling life. She has few friends. She's achieved almost nothing of note. She works a job where there's very few opportunities for advancement, and she lives a life of isolation. Her only familial relationship that she keeps up with is her mother, who is toxic and distant, and Eleanor really is just a shell-shocked individual. But she meets an individual and she falls in love, and she starts to change herself in order to pursue this love interest. This romantic pursuit acts as a catalyst for self-development for Eleanor. Watching her grow as a character, watching her achieve these breakthroughs was very therapeutic for me. I love the supporting cast of characters. I love seeing Eleanor go through dark moments, go through happy moments, and seeing her kind of get out of her shell. She's a very awkward, socially awkward protagonist, and I love weirdos. I love people who kind of don't fit in. I love seeing the world through their eyes because I'm extroverted. I'm a very extroverted individual, but I'm very somber and introspective at times, and I really feel like Eleanor Oliphant spoke to one half of who I was as a person. And this is a very therapeutic, trying, difficult read, but I promise it is worth it. Definitely give this book a try. There's a reason it's number 6 in my top 10. Now that we're breaking into my top 5, I have to say, spots 6 through 10 on this list were very difficult for me. I've read a lot of great books, several hundred of them, okay? But my top 5, these were easy to pick out. I instantly knew what books were in my top 5 because these books changed me. I had such a strong visceral reaction to all of these reads. I cried during all of them, and I think I will always love these. Even if there is a day where all these books are no longer on my top 10 list, I will still always recommend them strongly to other people. Book number 5 out of my top 10 favorite books of all time, we have The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. Book number 2 in his massive 4.4 million word Wheel of Time series. I loved this book. I loved it immensely. The Great Hunt is my favorite installment in this series by far. I'm almost halfway done. I think I've read 4 or 5 of the Wheel of Time books. But The Great Hunt is just a level above all of them. The Shadow Rising was amazing. The Eye of the World was amazing. The Dragon Rebirth, The Dragon Reborn was satisfactory. The Great Hunt, though, is a damn near spiritually moving work. Reading this book was a spiritual experience for me. The ending scene, the climax and falling action were inspired. Sends chills down my spine. I really feel like Robert Jordan was like dipping into something bigger than himself when he wrote the ending scene. It was perfect. It was epic. The series could have ended. Like, the ending of book 2 would have been a great ending to any series. And I still have, like, after reading this book, you still have like 13 more books left in the series. It really is something special. Robert Jordan, he has a lot of exposition. He uses a lot of descriptions. He gets the plot all bogged down of a bunch of side characters. And I'm not sure if I'm going to finish The Wheel of Time in 2025. But when I read The Great Hunt, I knew there was no doubt I was going to finish the journey eventually. This book will eventually, probably one day, be replaced by another Wheel of Time book on this top 10 list, because even though I have not even read half of the Wheel of Time, it is a series that is near and dear to my heart, and it is one of those first fantasy series that I gave a try as an adult. And The Great Hunt was really, truly an inspired work. I read book number 4 on this list less than 3 months ago. It's very popular on BookTube and Book Talk. A lot of people hyped this book up, and I was convinced that it was going to be overrated, because generally, books that a majority of the people love or think is amazing, it's probably just, popular, and they're just saying that. But upon reading this book, I could see that the hype is real and that all the praise, all the love for this book is deserved. And I'm talking about Stoner by John Williams. I've read 2 John Williams books in 2024, Butcher's Crossing and Stoner, and both are 5-star reads. Both are damn near perfect American novels, but Stoner is in a league of its own. This really is truly a read that I think anyone could relate to. It is perfectly written, it is perfectly paced, and it really was just an inspired work. From the first page, this book had me entranced. It starts off at William Stoner, our protagonist's funeral. He has just passed away, and we are told that he lived a life of little acclaim, little note, little accomplishment. He was just a lowly English professor. None of his colleagues thought highly of him, and his life was nothing special. Right away, that captured my attention, because that was one of my worst fears growing up. I was afraid when I was in high school that I was going to get a job, it was going to be a dead-end job, and I was going to accomplish nothing special. No one was going to love me. My family wasn't going to say anything special about me. And I was just never going to leave my mark. And I think that's a very universal experience that's at the center of the human existence. Anyone could read this book and relate to it, because William Stoner really captures a lot of the anxieties and insecurities that everybody has. Like, we're all afraid that we're not going to belong anywhere. We're all afraid we're not going to find the center of our circle. We're all afraid that the people we love aren't going to think highly of us. And William Stoner, his life was nothing special, nothing that was epic, nothing that would be remembered forever, but his life was still something to be mourned. We go through the highs and lows of this life, of this lowly college professor who has accomplished very few things of note, but still, what a story. I'm convinced that the adage that I heard when I was younger, that if you knew everything about a person, you could not help but love them, I believe that so strongly, because I knew William Stoner at the end of this book, and I mourned his loss. And I feel like you can't read this book and not feel empathy for the protagonist, and not feel love for the character, and not feel that the loss of his life was something worth mourning. This really is one of those books that I think should be universally read, particularly in high school and college, because I wish I'd read this book when I was younger. I think it would have had a very formative effect on me. At the number 4 spot, Stoner. I read it 3 months ago, less than 100 days ago, and it's going to stay with me forever. Book number 3, my bronze medalist, my 3rd favorite book of all time, The Great Gatsby. This book is a classic, deservedly so. There's a reason why it's compulsory, required reading in high schools across America. I'm one of those people that was supposed to read it in high school, but I didn't because I thought reading was lame. And then I read this book in 2019 and it opened my eyes. This is one of the first books of fiction that I read that wasn't fantasy or science fiction. It made me realize that I didn't need magic and wizards and dragons and time machines and aliens and space travel to be completely engrossed and captivated by a story. This book is not supernatural in the slightest. This book is so relatable because at the core, at the center of this narrative, is Jay Gatsby, a powerful individual who's doing everything in his power to recapture the past, to find his lost love. And what one of us has never tried to recapture our past, to relive our golden years, to take a step back and right a past mistake? Gatsby is such a relatable character. He is perhaps my favorite character in all of fiction. This story is tragic, it is thought-provoking, it is multifaceted, and I have so many theories about this book. I can talk about this book for hours. I'm actually sure many of my friends are sick of hearing me talk about this book because I know damn near every page of it. I've only read it twice, but it's a short read. I quote this book in everyday conversation all the time. I'm actually pretty damn sure my friends are sick of hearing me talk about The Great Gatsby, but I'll never stop. I'm never going to stop. I love the book. I love the movies. I love all the lore about this book. It truly is one of the great American novels. It is my number 3. I don't see a future anytime in the near future where this book is not on my top 10 list because it is just so central to who I am as a reader. At the number 2 spot, my silver medalist, my second favorite book of all time, we have A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. This book wrecked me. I read it in 2022 across 3 days, and I cried 11 times. Frederick Bachman writes about love like no other author out there. He writes love stories, not romance stories, love stories. And Ove, our protagonist, our crotchety old man, is such a lovable character. This book is not a story about a character who grows. There is no character arc with Ove, our protagonist. Instead, our main character plants his feet firmly in the ground. He never changes. But as the reader learns more and more details about Ove's life, you grow as a reader. Your opinion of Ove changes and morphs into something that can't be anything else but love. I cried for Ove 11 times. It holds the record. This book made me cry more than any other book. Ove is such a lifelike, larger-than-life character, while at the same time reminding you of so many of the old people you've met in your life. At the start of this book, Ove is not a likable protagonist. He is entertainingly mean. He is crotchety. He is rude. And he is angry. And you're like, why are we following this character? How is the story going to become compelling? And then it does. Ove is alone in this world. No friends, no family. I know many of us, me included, that's one of our worst fears, being alone, being bitter, and having to stick around. But as we learn more and more details about Ove, the story just grows into something so beautiful. I felt all the emotions on the spectrum while reading this book. I loved this old man. I felt like he was my grandfather upon completion of this book, and I was so sad after finishing this book that I would never get to read this book again for the first time, because it's not every day when a book makes you cry 11 times. Frederick Bachman is now one of my favorite authors. I've read 5 or 6 of his works, but A Man Called Ove is in God tier for me. Absolutely astounding. And finally, the moment you've all been waiting for, my gold medal, my numero uno, my favorite book of all time, even if you included works of nonfiction, Blackwater by Michael McDowell. This is a Southern Gothic masterpiece. Michael McDowell passed away over 2 decades ago, but during his life, Stephen King, my favorite author, said that Michael McDowell was the best writer of paperback originals in America. And that's very high praise indeed. So I picked up this book because it's considered his best work, and it blew my mind. Blackwater tells the story of the Caskies, a dominant family in Perdido, Alabama. It takes place across 50 years from 1918 to 1968-ish. America changed a lot during those 50 years, and the Caskey family changes immensely. We see several generations pass away. We see grandkids born and have children. We see so much change in 50 years. I felt like I was a part of the family. I felt like I watched the Caskey go through highs and lows. There are supernatural elements. I guess this book is kind of horror. There's 5 scary scenes across 6 books, but they're not too scary. I think even if you're not a lover of horror, you'll love this book. I don't know how this book has not been turned into like an HBO series because there's so much material, such great characterization, such amazing detail. I felt like I was walking the street of Perdido, Alabama. I felt like I was a member of the Caskey family. When tragedy struck, it hurt me. When great things happened to this family, I cheered with them. Characterization is very important to me. I'm very much a character first reader. This book is not super fast paced. Not a lot happens. It's basically a political drama meets a family saga. There's some like reality soap opera like elements to this story, and I just loved it all. I'm going to be reading a lot more family sagas in 2025, and Blackwater is the reason why. Because if you looked into the history of any family, you would find so many things that are story worthy. I know art is subjective, but I will accept no criticism about Blackwater. It is a perfect read to me. There is a reason why everyone that reads this book here on BookTube speaks so highly about this story. It is so immersive. The character work is astounding, top notch, second to none. Sure, not a lot of things happen in the general sense, but Blackwater is every bit as epic as a book like The Stand is. A bunch of things happen in The Stand, but I will still say that the emotional mileage in Blackwater is just so much more. This is my favorite book of all time. One day it might be knocked out of its spot, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Michael McDowell, you were gone too soon. If he could write any book that's anywhere near the level of this book, you're going to see it on the top 10 list sometime next year. I can't wait to see how this list changes in 2025. I'm going to upload another top 10 list next December. I'm sure some of these books will trade places. Some of these books will no longer be in my top 10, and that will be a bittersweet moment. But that's one of the great things about being a reader. A non-reader only lives one life. A person who reads lives 1,000 lives. And I will live at least 100 more lives before this time next year. And that's such an exciting prospect. You have my top 10 favorite books of all time. What are your guys's? Leave them in the comments below, and I'll talk to you guys next time.